Daniel Carter moved quietly through the corridors of Haven's main hospital, his white coat swaying slightly with each step. The soft hum of machines and the occasional murmur of patients filled the air. It was late, but Daniel didn't mind. He had always preferred the quiet hours when the world seemed to slow down, leaving only him and the work he loved. Healing wasn't just a job for Daniel, it was his purpose. Every life saved felt like a small victory against the chaos that often surrounded their colony. Outside, the night sky stretched endlessly above Haven, dotted with stars that reminded everyone how far they were from Earth. The colony had been built as a fresh start, a place where humanity could rebuild after years of conflict on their home planet. For a while, it worked. People grew crops, built homes, and even began to dream again. But peace, Daniel knew, was fragile. It always had been. Emily Foster sat in her office, staring at a blinking screen filled with reports. She was one of the few people still awake at this hour, though unlike Daniel, her reasons were less about passion and more about duty. As the head of Haven's defense systems, Emily spent most of her time preparing for the worst. Her sharp eyes scanned the documents before her, each one detailing strange attacks on nearby colonies. Medical facilities had been targeted, hospitals destroyed, doctors taken, medics killed. No one knew who was behind it or why. All they knew was that the strikes were precise, brutal, and growing closer. A sudden noise jolted Emily from her thoughts. It came from outside, a faint rumble, almost like thunder. She stood quickly, grabbing her communicator. "Control room," she said sharply. "What's going on out there?" "Nothing showing up on radar, Mom," came the reply. "Could be atmospheric disturbance." Emily frowned. Something didn't feel right. She decided to check things herself. Pulling on her jacket, she headed toward the hospital. If something was happening, Daniel would need backup. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, Daniel heard the same distant rumble. At first, he dismissed it as nothing, a quirk of the weather, perhaps. But then the lights flickered. For a moment, everything went dark. When the power returned, Daniel noticed something odd. Several monitors displayed static instead of vital signs. He rushed to check on his patients, his heart pounding. That's when the alarms blared. Red warning lights flashed across the building as emergency protocols kicked in. Staff scrambled to secure equipment and calm frightened patients. Daniel grabbed a nearby nurse. "What's going on?" he asked urgently. "We're not sure," she replied, panic creeping into her voice. "Something's interfering with the systems." Before Daniel could respond, the first explosion rocked the building. The sound was deafening, shaking the walls and sending debris flying. Instinctively, Daniel dropped to the floor, shielding his head. When the dust settled, he looked around in shock. Part of the ceiling had collapsed, blocking access to the east wing. Screams echoed through the halls as smoke began to fill the air. Emily arrived moments later, pushing past stunned staff members. Her gaze locked onto Daniel, who was already helping an injured nurse to her feet. "Are you okay?" she demanded, her tone urgent but controlled. "I'm fine," Daniel replied, brushing dust off his coat. His eyes darted to the destruction around them. "But we've got wounded everywhere, and I don't think this is over." Emily nodded grimly. Whatever, or whoever, had attacked them wasn't done yet. As shouts and cries filled the hospital, both Daniel and Emily knew one thing for certain. Their lives, and the fate of Haven itself, were about to change forever. The hospital was in chaos. Patients lay on makeshift stretchers in the hallways, some bleeding, others too frightened to speak. Daniel moved quickly between them, his hand steady despite the turmoil around him. He tied bandages, administered medicine, and offered words of comfort where he could. But no matter how hard he worked, there were always more people needing help than he could reach. The weight of it pressed down on him, but he pushed forward. Stopping wasn't an option. Emily stood nearby, her sharp eyes scanning the room. She had already taken charge of securing the area. directing staff to block broken windows and reinforce weakened walls. Her calm demeanor helped keep others focused, even as fear lingered in the air. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound louder. She glanced at Daniel, who was crouched beside a young girl with a gash on her forehead. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. Emily knew he was holding himself together by sheer willpower. "Daniel," she said, stepping closer, "we need to figure out what happened here." He nodded without looking up. "I know, but right now, these people need me." "I'll handle things here," Emily replied firmly. "You focus on finding answers. Start with the equipment, see if anything was tampered with." Reluctantly, Daniel handed off the last patient to another nurse and followed Emily's instructions. Together, they made their way to the main control room, which was now a mess of sparking wires and shattered monitors. The air smelled of burnt plastic. Daniel knelt beside one of the damaged consoles, his fingers brushing over the scorched metal. Something about the destruction felt deliberate, as though someone had wanted to erase all traces of what they'd done. "This wasn't random," Daniel muttered, his voice low. "Whoever did this knew exactly where to hit." Emily crossed her arms, her expression grim. "It matches the pattern we've seen in other colonies. They're targeting hospitals, people who heal." "But why?" Daniel asked, frustration creeping into his tone. "What kind of enemy goes after medics? We're not soldiers. We don't fight back." "That's probably the point," Emily said quietly. "If you take out the healers, you weaken everyone else. No one can recover if there's no one left to patch them up." Daniel shook his head, disbelief warring with anger. "And what happens next? Do we just wait for them to come back?" "No," Emily said firmly. "We find them first." Over the next few hours, they pieced together fragments of information. The attack had been swift and precise, using technology far beyond anything Haven possessed. There were no signs of conventional weapons, no bullets or shrapnel. Instead, the damage suggested energy-based explosives, designed to cripple rather than destroy completely. Whoever was behind this didn't want to leave evidence, but they hadn't counted on Daniel noticing something small yet significant: tiny metallic shards embedded in the wreckage. They looked almost organic, like pieces of machinery fused with living tissue. "What are these?" Emily asked, holding one up to the light. "I don't know," Daniel admitted, examining another shard closely. "But they're not natural. Someone built them." As dawn broke over Haven, the full extent of the attack became clear. Dozens were injured, several critically. 3 staff members had died in the initial blast. News spread quickly among the settlers, sparking panic and outrage. Rumors began to swirl about invaders, saboteurs, or even rogue factions within humanity itself. Emily called an emergency meeting with the colony's leadership, determined to push for action before fear turned into chaos. Back at the hospital, Daniel sat alone in a quiet corner, staring at the shard in his hand. He thought about the lives lost, the patients he hadn't been able to save. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. But deep down, a spark of determination ignited. If someone wanted to hurt the healers, they would have to answer for it, and Daniel wouldn't rest until they did. The council chamber was tense, the air thick with unease. Emily stood at the center of the room, her arms crossed as she addressed the colony's leaders. Around the table sat men and women who had helped build Haven from scratch, their faces now etched with worry. Some clutched cups of cold coffee, others tapped restless fingers against the wooden surface. No one spoke, not yet. They were waiting for Emily to explain how their peaceful colony had become a target. "We can't ignore what happened last night," Emily began, her voice steady but firm. "This wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. Whoever attacked us knew exactly where to strike. And why?" Daniel sat off to the side, his hands clasped tightly together. He hadn't said much since arriving, letting Emily take the lead. But he could feel the weight of everyone's stares, their questions unspoken but clear. Could they have done more? Should they have seen this coming? The guilt gnawed at him, though he tried to push it aside. Emily continued, pacing slowly as she laid out the facts. The attackers went after our hospital. They used advanced technology, something we've never seen before. And based on reports from other colonies, this is part of a pattern. Medical facilities are being destroyed, medics killed or taken. We're not the first, and unless we act, we won't be the last. A murmur rippled through the room. One council member, an older man named Robert Hale, leaned forward. What do you suggest we do? Fight back. With what? We don't even know who's behind this. That's why we need answers, Emily replied. But sitting here isn't going to get them. I propose forming a task force, a small team to investigate these attacks and stop whoever's responsible before they hit us again. And who would lead this task force? Asked another council member, a woman named Claire Bennett. Her tone was skeptical, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. I will, Emily said without hesitation. She glanced at Daniel. And I want Daniel Carter on the team. His knowledge of medical equipment might help us understand what we're dealing with. Daniel blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected to be included, but he nodded when Emily looked at him. If there was a chance to protect others from suffering like they had last night, he couldn't refuse. The council debated for nearly an hour before finally agreeing to Emily's plan. 2 additional members were chosen to join the task force. Rachel Adams, a skilled pilot known for her quick reflexes, and Nathan Cole, a tech expert who could dismantle almost anything electronic. Both arrived shortly after the meeting ended, their expressions serious but determined. In a small briefing room, Emily gathered the team to discuss their next steps. Maps of nearby colonies covered the walls, marked with red dots indicating sites of previous attacks. Nathan adjusted his glasses as he studied the patterns. Whoever's doing this is smart, he said thoughtfully. They move fast, hit hard, and leave little behind. Which means we'll need to move faster, Emily added. Our first priority is gathering evidence. If we can figure out how they operate, we might be able to predict where they'll strike next. Rachel crossed her arms, her sharp green eyes narrowing. And if we find them, then we stop them, Emily said simply. By any means necessary. Daniel listened quietly, his mind racing. He wanted justice. For the victims, for Haven, for himself. But the idea of confronting whoever had caused so much pain felt overwhelming. Still, he reminded himself why he'd agreed to join the team. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves. As the meeting broke up, Emily pulled Daniel aside. You okay? She asked, her tone softer than usual. He hesitated before nodding. I'm fine. Just thinking. You don't have to do this alone, she said firmly. We're in this together. For the first time that day, Daniel allowed himself a small smile. Maybe they had a chance after all. The task force prepared quickly, knowing time was not on their side. Rachel Adams checked the small shuttle one last time, making sure it was stocked with supplies and ready for flight. She ran her hands over the controls, a habit born from years of trusting only what she could personally verify. Nathan Cole sat at a nearby workstation, his fingers flying across a keyboard as he analyzed data from the previous attacks. Daniel stood by the window, staring out at the stars. His mind kept drifting back to the hospital, to the faces of those who hadn't survived. Emily paced nearby, her sharp eyes scanning everyone's movements. She didn't like waiting, especially when lives were at stake. Coordinates set, Rachel announced, breaking the silence. We're heading to New Haven first. It's the closest colony that was hit. Emily nodded. Good. Let's move. The journey took several hours, but no one spoke much during the flight. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, blending with the occasional beep of Nathan's computer. Daniel flipped through notes on his tablet, reviewing what little information they had about the attacks. Each report mentioned the same thing. Sudden explosions, missing medics, and strange metallic fragments left behind. He frowned, trying to piece together the puzzle. Something about those shards felt important, though he couldn't quite figure out why. When they arrived at New Haven, the scene was eerily familiar. The hospital lay in ruins, its walls blackened and crumbling. The air smelled of ash and melted metal, a stark reminder of the destruction wrought here. Rachel landed the shuttle a safe distance away, and the team stepped out cautiously. Even in daylight, the place felt haunted, as if the ghosts of those who died still lingered among the wreckage. "This way," Nathan said, leading them toward the main building. He held up a handheld scanner, its screen lighting up with readings. "There's residual energy here, same signature as the attack on Haven." Daniel crouched beside a pile of debris, sifting through the rubble. His gloved hand brushed against something hard and metallic. Carefully, he pulled it free. A shard, just like the ones he'd found back home. But this one was larger, more intact. Its surface shimmered faintly, almost alive. "Look at this," he said, holding it up for the others to see. Nathan adjusted his glasses, leaning in for a closer look. "It's part of some kind of device. Maybe a weapon. Or something worse," Emily muttered, her brow furrowing. "Let's keep looking." As they moved deeper into the ruins, the evidence grew more disturbing. In one room, they discovered remnants of medical equipment fused with organic material, pieces of flesh and bone embedded in machines. Daniel froze, his stomach churning. "They weren't just killing people," he whispered. "They were experimenting on them." Rachel clenched her fists, anger flashing in her eyes. Why would anyone do that? What kind of monster experiments on medics? "I don't think they're human," Nathan said quietly. "At least, not entirely. This tech, it's beyond anything I've ever seen. Whoever made it isn't playing by our rules." The realization sent a chill through the group. If their enemy wasn't human, or wasn't fully human, they were facing something far more dangerous than they'd imagined. Emily's voice cut through the tension. "We need to get this back to Haven. If we can figure out how these devices work, maybe we can find a way to stop them." Daniel nodded, slipping the shard into a secure container. But as they turned to leave, a low rumble echoed through the ruins. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and dust rained down from the ceiling. Nathan's scanner began beeping wildly. "Something's coming," he shouted. "Move." Emily barked, grabbing Daniel's arm and pulling him toward the exit. Rachel sprinted ahead, her reflexes putting her steps ahead of the others. Behind them, the sound of collapsing walls grew louder, forcing them to run faster. Whatever was causing the disturbance was closing in, and it wasn't friendly. They barely made it back to the shuttle before the entire structure collapsed in a cloud of smoke and debris. Breathing heavily, the team strapped in as Rachel powered up the engines. As they lifted off, Daniel glanced back at the ruins below. Whoever, or whatever, they were dealing with, one thing was clear. This fight was far from over. Back on Haven, the team gathered in a secure lab to examine the evidence they'd collected from New Haven. Nathan spread the metallic shards across a table, his tools and scanners humming as he worked. Daniel stood nearby, his arms crossed, watching intently. The shard they'd brought back seemed to pulse faintly under the light, its surface shifting like liquid metal. It was unlike anything any of them had ever seen. "This isn't just tech," Nathan said, adjusting his glasses. "It's alive, or at least part of it is. These fragments are some kind of hybrid material, combining machine and organic tissue." "Organic?" Emily asked sharply, stepping closer. "You mean human?" Nathan hesitated before nodding. "Possibly, or something close to it. Whoever made this wasn't just building weapons. They were merging biology with machinery. This could explain why they're targeting medics. They might be harvesting knowledge or skills." Daniel felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "So they're using people, turning them into experiments." "It looks that way," Nathan replied grimly. "And if we don't stop them, they'll keep doing it." The room fell silent as the weight of the discovery sank in. Rachel leaned against the wall, her arms folded tightly. If these monsters aren't human, then what are they? And how do we fight something like that? We find their weakness, Emily said firmly. Everything has one. Nathan, keep analyzing this thing. See if you can trace its origin or figure out how it works. Rachel, prep the shuttle. We may need to move fast again soon. As Nathan continued his work, Emily turned her attention to Haven's internal security. If their enemy was capable of such advanced technology, there was no guarantee the colony was safe. She called for a meeting with Marcus Lane, one of Haven's council members who oversaw external communications. Something about him had always felt off to Emily. His reluctance to share information, his evasive answers during meetings. But she couldn't ignore the possibility that he might know more than he let on. Marcus arrived at her office later that evening, his usual confident smile firmly in place. Emily. He greeted her warmly. What's the emergency? I want to know what you're hiding, Emily said without preamble, her tone icy. There's been talk of encrypted messages coming through our systems. Messages you've been intercepting. Marcus raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. I'm not sure what you're referring to. My job is to protect Haven, same as yours. Then why won't you cooperate? Emily shot back. We're under attack, Marcus. People are dying. If you know something, now's the time to speak up. For a moment, Marcus said nothing. Then his expression hardened. You think I'm involved in this somehow? That's absurd. It's not absurd if it's true, Emily countered. Let me remind you, if Haven falls, none of us will survive. Not even you. Marcus stared at her for a long moment before leaning back in his chair. Fine. Maybe I've held back some details, but trust me, it's for your own good. That's not your call to make, Emily snapped. Tell me everything, or I'll make sure the entire council hears about your little secret. Reluctantly, Marcus handed over a data chip. This contains intercepted transmissions. Some of them are troubling. But be careful, Emily. Once you see what's on there, there's no going back. Later that night, Emily reviewed the files in private. What she found chilled her to the bone. The transmissions confirmed her worst fears. Someone within Haven had been communicating with the attackers, feeding them information about the colony's defenses. Worse still, the messages hinted at a mole, a traitor working directly with the enemy. Emily clenched her fists, anger boiling inside her. Betrayal was the last thing they needed right now. But she knew one thing for certain. Whoever was behind this would pay. Haven wasn't just a colony. It was home. And Emily wouldn't let anyone destroy it. The discovery of the mole shook Emily to her core. She knew she couldn't handle this alone, but she also couldn't risk spreading panic across Haven. Instead, she called an emergency meeting with Daniel, Nathan, and Rachel in the same secure lab where they had analyzed the metallic shards. The room was dimly lit, the hum of equipment filling the silence as Emily placed the data chip on the table. We have a problem, she began, her voice low but steady. There's a traitor among us. Someone's been feeding information to the attackers. Daniel's eyes widened. Are you sure? Who would do something like that? I don't know yet, Emily admitted. But Marcus gave me this. She tapped the chip. It contains intercepted messages between one of our people and the enemy. If we can decode them fully, we might find out who it is. Nathan grabbed the chip and slid it into his computer. Lines of encrypted text filled the screen, glowing faintly in the darkened room. He cracked his knuckles, already diving into the task. Give me some time. I'll break it. Rachel leaned against the wall, her arms crossed. Even if we find the mole, what then? Do we confront them? Lock them up? We deal with it quietly, Emily said firmly. If word gets out, it could cause chaos. For now, we focus on stopping the attacks. That's our priority. As Nathan worked, the team discussed their next move. They decided to return to another attacked colony, this time one farther away, hoping to uncover more clues about the enemy's base of operations. But before they left, Nathan made a breakthrough. His fingers froze over the keyboard as he read the decoded message aloud. "They're planning another strike," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "And it's happening soon. At Haven." Daniel's heart sank. "They're coming back here." "Why?" "Because they think we're weak," Emily answered grimly. "They hit us once, and now they're finishing the job." Rachel straightened, her expression hardening. "Then let's give them a fight they won't forget." The team sprang into action. Emily coordinated with Haven's defense forces, reinforcing key areas while keeping the impending attack secret from the general population. Rachel prepped the shuttle for a quick escape route if needed, while Nathan continued analyzing the messages for any hint of the enemy's location. Meanwhile, Daniel focused on preparing the hospital staff for another possible assault, ensuring everyone knew what to do in case of emergency. Hours later, Nathan called the group together again. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he held up a blueprint displayed on his screen. "I found something big," he said. "This is a weapon design, one of theirs. It's called the Angels of Death." "The what?" Rachel asked, frowning. "It's autonomous drones," Nathan explained. "Highly advanced. They can disable entire armies without harming civilians. But here's the thing. They're controlled remotely. If we can hack into their system, we might be able to turn them against the attackers." Emily's mind raced. That could work. But how do we get close enough to try? "There's only one way," Nathan replied. "We go to their stronghold. These blueprints came from somewhere, and I think I can trace the source." Daniel hesitated, looking uneasy. "This sounds dangerous. What if we walk straight into a trap?" "We don't have a choice," Emily said firmly. The team prepared for the most dangerous mission they'd ever faced. Nathan traced the source of the blueprints to a remote asteroid base, hidden deep within a dense field of rocks and debris. It was heavily fortified, with energy shields and automated defenses that made it nearly impossible to approach undetected. But Rachel had flown through worse, and she wasn't about to let a few obstacles stop her. "We'll need to move fast," she said as she plotted their course. "If we're spotted, we're dead." Emily nodded, her expression grim. "We get in, find the control system for the Angels of Death, and reprogram them. Then we get out before anyone realizes what we've done." Daniel listened quietly, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He wasn't trained for combat or espionage, but he knew he couldn't stay behind. If there was even a small chance they could stop the attackers, he had to be part of it. Still, the thought of facing the enemy head-on filled him with dread. The journey to the asteroid base was tense. Rachel navigated the shuttle through narrow gaps between asteroids, her focus unwavering as alarms blared from proximity sensors. Nathan monitored the ship's systems, muttering under his breath as he worked to mask their presence from detection. Emily sat in the co-pilot's seat, her eyes scanning the darkness ahead. Daniel stayed in the back, clutching a medkit like a lifeline. When they finally reached the base, the structure loomed before them. A massive, jagged hulk of metal and glass, surrounded by shimmering energy fields. Rachel brought the shuttle to a stop just outside the shield perimeter. "I can't get us any closer without triggering the alarms," she said. "We'll have to go on foot from here." The team suited up in stealth gear, equipping themselves with tools and weapons scavenged from Haven's limited arsenal. As they approached the base, Nathan hacked into an external terminal, disabling a section of the shield long enough for them to slip inside. The air inside was cold and sterile, the walls lined with pulsating veins of light that seemed almost alive. "This place gives me the creeps," Rachel muttered, her hand resting on her weapon. "Stay focused," Emily whispered. "Nathan, lead the way." Following the map Nathan had pieced together, they'd moved deeper into the base. Along the way, they passed rooms filled with horrifying sights, cages containing twisted, half-mechanical creatures that twitched and groaned in pain. It was clear the enemy had been experimenting on living beings, merging flesh with machinery in grotesque ways. Daniel clenched his fists, forcing himself not to look too closely. Finally, they reached the control room, a vast chamber filled with glowing consoles and towering screens displaying feeds from across the galaxy. At the center stood a massive holographic interface labeled Angels of Death. Nathan rushed to the controls, his fingers flying over the keys as he began reprogramming the drones. "How long will this take?" Emily asked, keeping watch at the door. "Too long," Nathan replied, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "They'll know we're here soon." As if on cue, alarms began to blare throughout the base. Red lights flashed, bathing the room in an ominous glow. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside as guards approached. "We've got company," Rachel shouted, raising her weapon. Emily turned to Daniel. "Stay with Nathan. Protect him no matter what." "I'm not leaving you," Daniel started, but Emily cut him off. "You're needed here. Trust us to hold them off." Reluctantly, Daniel nodded, stepping behind Nathan to shield him as Emily and Rachel took positions at the door. Moments later, the first wave of enemies burst into the room. Hybrid soldiers, part human and part machine, their movements jerky yet precise. Emily fired her weapon, taking down two before ducking behind cover. Rachel followed suit, her aim steady despite the chaos. The fight was brutal and relentless. Bullets ricocheted off walls, sparks flying as the hybrids pressed forward. Just when it seemed they were outnumbered, Nathan let out a triumphant shout. "I've done it. The angels are ours." On the screens, the drones shifted course, turning their weapons against the hybrid soldiers. One by one, the attackers fell, overwhelmed by the very machines they had created. But the victory came at a cost. Marcus Lane appeared suddenly, stepping out from the shadows with a smug smile. "You really think you've won?" he sneered, holding up a detonator. Before anyone could react, he pressed the button, triggering an explosion that shook the entire base. The shuttle roared through the asteroid field, its engines straining as Rachel pushed it to the limit. Behind them, the enemy base crumbled into a fiery ruin, the explosion lighting up the darkness like a dying star. The team sat in silence, their faces pale and streaked with sweat. No one spoke, not yet. They were too busy processing what had just happened. The mission had succeeded, but the cost felt unbearable. Daniel leaned against the wall, clutching the medkit tightly in his lap. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from anger. Marcus Lane's betrayal burned in his mind. The smug smile, the detonator, the way he'd chosen to destroy everything rather than face justice. It wasn't just the loss of the base that stung. It was the knowledge that someone they trusted had been working against them all along. Emily sat in the co-pilot's seat, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the armrests, but her expression gave nothing away. Inside, though, her thoughts raced. She had suspected Marcus might be involved, but she hadn't expected him to go so far. Leaving him behind in the explosion felt like both a victory and a failure, a reminder that even when you won, there were always losses. "Are we safe?" Nathan asked finally, breaking the silence. His voice was shaky, exhaustion evident in every word. "For now," Rachel replied, her eyes glued to the controls. "But we need to get back to Haven fast. If anyone else is working with Marcus, we can't afford to waste time." Emily nodded. "Agreed. Once we're home, we lock down communications and run checks on everyone. We can't trust anyone until we know for sure who's on our side." As the shuttle broke free of the asteroid field and entered open space, the tension began to ease slightly. Nathan slumped in his seat, letting out a long breath. "We did it," he murmured. "The angels of death are under our control now. That should stop them from attacking us again." "But at what cost?" Daniel asked bitterly. He looked at Emily. "How many more people have to die before this ends?" Emily turned to meet his gaze. "I don't know, Daniel, but we'll do whatever it takes to protect Haven. That's the only thing we can do." By the time they returned to Haven, news of their success had already spread. The colony's leaders greeted them with cautious optimism, relieved that the immediate threat had been neutralized. Nathan worked tirelessly to integrate the reprogrammed Angels of Death into Haven's defense systems, ensuring they could respond to any future attacks. Rachel took charge of patrolling the skies, her sharp eyes scanning for signs of trouble, and Emily coordinated efforts to root out any remaining traitors within the colony. For Daniel, life slowly began to return to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after everything they'd been through. He threw himself into his work at the hospital, treating patients and training new medics. But the memories lingered. Every time he passed a shattered window or saw a child recovering from injuries caused by the attack, he was reminded of how fragile peace really was. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Haven, Emily joined Daniel on the hospital rooftop. They stood in silence for a while, watching the sky shift from orange to deep purple. "You've done good work here," Emily said finally, her tone softer than usual. "Haven wouldn't have made it this far without you." Daniel shook his head. "I didn't do enough. Too many people died. And too many lived because of you," Emily countered firmly. "Don't forget that." He sighed, looking out at the distant fields. "Do you think it's over? Really over?" "I don't know," Emily admitted. "But I do know one thing. We'll keep fighting. For Haven. For each other." As the first stars appeared in the night sky, Daniel felt a small flicker of hope. The road ahead would be hard, and the scars of betrayal would take time to heal. But as long as they stood together, Haven had a chance. And sometimes, that was all anyone could ask for. The days that followed the team's return to Haven were a blur of activity. The colony buzzed with cautious optimism, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. People whispered about Marcus Lane and his betrayal, how someone so trusted could turn against them. Emily worked tirelessly to restore faith in Haven's leadership, holding public meetings to assure settlers that every measure was being taken to prevent another attack. She knew trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight, but she also knew silence would only breed fear. Daniel threw himself into his work at the hospital, treating patients and training new medics. His hands moved steadily, bandaging wounds and administering medicine, but his mind often wandered. He replayed the mission over and over, the eerie corridors of the enemy base, the grotesque experiments, Marcus's final act of destruction. It haunted him, not just because of what he'd seen, but because it reminded him how fragile their safety truly was. Nathan spent most of his time in the tech lab, monitoring the Angels of Death now integrated into Haven's defense systems. The drones lingered silently in orbit, ready to respond to any threat. Nathan ran countless simulations, testing their limits and refining their programming. "These things are powerful," he told Rachel one evening as they reviewed data together. "But they're tools, not solutions. If we rely on them too much, we risk becoming like the people who built them." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "You think we should focus on something else?" "I think we need balance," Nathan replied. "Technology can help us defend ourselves, but it won't fix everything. We still need people to make decisions, to care for each other. That's what makes Haven different." Meanwhile, Emily pushed forward with her efforts to uncover any lingering threats within the colony. She ordered background checks on all council members and key personnel, no matter how uncomfortable it made some people feel. "Better to be safe than sorry," she said firmly when questioned. To her relief, no further evidence of betrayal surfaced, though the shadow of suspicion lingered. As weeks passed, life on Haven began to stabilize. Crops were harvested, children returned to school, and laughter once again echoed through the streets. But Daniel found it hard to let go of the weight he carried. One night, unable to sleep, he wandered to the edge of the settlement, where the land stretched out into rolling hills under a blanket of stars. He sat on a rock, staring up at the sky, trying to quiet his racing thoughts. Emily found him there, wrapped in a light jacket against the cool breeze. She didn't say anything at first, simply sitting beside him in companionable silence. After a while, she spoke softly. "You've been carrying this alone for too long." Daniel glanced at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "The guilt," she said simply. "I see it in your eyes every time you walk into a room. You think you should have done more, saved everyone. But you can't save everyone, Daniel. No one can." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "It doesn't make it easier." "No," Emily agreed. "It doesn't. But beating yourself up won't change what happened. What matters is what you do next, how you keep moving forward." Her words stayed with him long after they parted ways. Over the following days, Daniel began to shift his focus, not just on healing bodies, but on rebuilding hope. He organized community gatherings, inviting settlers to share stories of resilience and strength. He encouraged others to talk about their fears and losses, creating spaces where pain could be acknowledged without judgment. Slowly, Haven began to heal, not perfectly, but enough to remind everyone why they had chosen this place as their home. The scars of the past remained, etched into the walls of the hospital and the memories of those who had lived through the attacks. But alongside those scars grew determination, a shared resolve to protect what they had built, no matter the cost. One evening, as the colony gathered to celebrate their survival, Emily stood before the crowd, her voice steady and clear. "We've faced darkness," she said, "and we've come out stronger. Not because of weapons or technology, but because of each other, because we refused to give up." The settlers cheered, their voices rising into the night. Among them, Daniel smiled faintly, feeling the glimmer of peace for the first time in months. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And that, he realized, was enough. Months passed, and Haven began to feel like a new place, not untouched by pain, but stronger because of it. The scars of the attacks remained visible in the repaired walls of the hospital and the empty spaces left by those who had been lost. Yet life went on, shaped by resilience and determination. Daniel walked through the colony one morning, watching as farmers tended to their crops and children played in the fields. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was a sense of calm. Emily stood nearby, overseeing the construction of a memorial dedicated to those who had died during the attacks. It was a simple structure, a stone arch surrounded by flowers, but it carried deep meaning for everyone involved. As workers placed the final touches, she turned to Daniel, who had joined her quietly. "Do you think it's enough?" she asked, nodding toward the memorial. "It's not about being enough," Daniel replied softly. "It's about remembering, about honoring them." Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. She had stepped down from her role as head of defense, choosing instead to focus on fostering unity within the colony. Her sharp instincts and leadership skills were still valued, but she wanted to leave room for others to step up. Rachel had taken over patrol duties, her quick reflexes ensuring Haven's skies remained safe. Nathan continued to refine the angels of death, though he often reminded himself, and anyone who would listen, that technology alone couldn't solve every problem. For Daniel, the changes were both personal and profound. He had started teaching younger medics, passing on his knowledge while encouraging them to find their own paths. Healing wasn't just about fixing wounds. It was about listening, connecting, and giving people hope. He also spent more time with the settlers, sharing meals and stories, learning about their lives beyond the hospital walls. It helped him see Haven not just as a place of work, but as a home. One evening, the colony gathered for a celebration under the stars. Lanterns hung from trees, casting warm light across the gathering. Music played softly, and laughter filled the air. People danced, shared food, and told stories of survival and strength. At the center of it all stood the memorial, its stones glowing faintly in the moonlight. Emily addressed the crowd briefly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We've faced challenges that could have broken us," she said, "but we didn't break. We came together, fought for each other, and built something worth protecting. This isn't just a colony, it's a family." The settlers cheered, their voices rising into the night. Daniel watched silently, feeling a quiet pride swell within him. He thought about the lives lost, the sacrifices made, and the lessons learned. They had been tested in ways no one could have imagined, but they had endured. As the celebration wound down, Daniel found himself standing beside Rachel and Nathan near the edge of the crowd. Rachel grinned at him, her usual bravado softened by genuine warmth. "You did good, Doc," she said. "Don't forget that." Nathan nodded in agreement. "Yeah, you kept us grounded when things got crazy. That counts for something." Daniel smiled faintly, touched by their words. "We all did our part," he said. "That's what matters." Later that night, as the last lanterns dimmed and the colony fell silent, Daniel climbed to the rooftop of the hospital. The stars stretched endlessly above him, familiar yet infinite. He thought about the journey they had been through, the fear, the loss, the moments of hope, and realized something important. Haven wasn't perfect, and neither were they, but they were alive together and determined to keep moving forward. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them, not out of obligation, but out of love for the home they had created. And in that moment, he knew they would be okay.